Welcome back to another Ask Mind Money Balance. In this video, I'm going to answer an audience member's question about whether or not they can afford to buy a house, but really what we're getting to is the feelings around buying that house. Hello, my name is Lindsay. I'm a financial therapist and founder of the financial wellness business, Mind Money Balance. I help people at the intersection of money and mental health so they can feel good about engaging with their money. I'm also the author of the book, The Financial Anxiety Solution, that you can get wherever books are sold. If you want to ask me a question, head to mindmoneybalance.com/ask to submit your question there, and I might answer it right here. Let's get into this question. Dear Lindsay, I'm a single female looking to purchase a primary residence in the Atlanta metro area. I'm a flight attendant, so I'd be leaning towards single family or condos without HOAs so I can Airbnb my place while I'm gone for additional income. Great. I think I have enough savings and income to afford a mortgage and my monthly bills, but it's driving me crazy because the mortgage is more than double what I'm paying in rent. I also have a roommate right now, so it's going to be a big jump. The prices of reasonable move-in ready homes seem to feel like they're disappearing and the prices are creeping up. I've never not had money for rent and I don't want to feel house poor when I purchase. I don't want to catastrophize, but I'm always considering the worst case scenarios and my savings wouldn't last very long if something happened to my income. I do have a small emergency fund, but my emergency fund is based on my current living expenses, not on what my future living expenses would be if I had a mortgage. Any mortgage that I get will be at least double what I currently pay in rent. Do you have any advice for me? How can I wrap my mind around the increase in monthly payments? Do you have any recommendations for dealing with house buying anxiety? Thanks for any insights. N in Atlanta. And I heard and read and felt so much anxiety in this letter. I first just want to say thank you for being so vulnerable in this letter. If you are wondering this question, you're not alone. So many of us are turning toward experts or gurus to decide whether or not we can afford something, and we will get into the money side of things, but first, I want to tackle and give you some thoughts on the emotional side of your letter. First, why do you want to own a home? There's a lot of pressure in our country to be a homeowner as a way to build wealth or to be good with money. But the reality is that housing costs are so exorbitantly expensive. And unless there is a very good reason for you buying and owning a home, I really want you to consider whether or not it makes sense to make this big jump. When I think about why you want a home, if we erase all of the things that have to do with wasting money on rent, which is an entirely different conversation for a different day, I want you to think about what are the things that would be beneficial for you personally in owning a home. For example, do you like knowing that you can paint where you live whatever color you want, or you can put as many holes in the walls as you want? Or maybe you're a gardener or you have a dog and you want to have outdoor space that is yours to do what you want with. Maybe you like tinkering on the weeks where you're not working. With a lot of flight attendants, they do like 10 days on, 7 days off, that kind of a thing. Maybe you really enjoy getting your hands dirty, literally speaking, and painting or crafting or fixing up projects around the house. Maybe that is really valuable for you. Maybe there are certain neighborhoods that you want to live in that put you closer to your family and to your friends, and where you're renting right now, it's just far away, or the rental options where you want to live just don't exist. Really think through, why do I want to own a home, and what am I hoping to get out of owning a home outside of the money portion of things? That's the first thing. Next, I want to address the other thing that you brought up that is around your feelings and around your emotions, which is financial anxiety. Financial anxiety is having anxious thoughts, feelings, and behaviors regarding a specific financial decision in our lives. It sounds to me, as I read through this letter, that there's a lot of worry that somehow you're going to make a mistake, or this isn't going to be the right choice, or that you haven't thoroughly thought through all of the different outcomes of owning a house. So I want you to get comfortable writing down that worry and then lovingly and compassionately examining it to see how much truth is in that specific worry. For example, a worry that you said was, I'm paraphrasing here, is I don't want to catastrophize, but what happens if I lose my job and can't make the monthly payments? I want you to write out that thought. If I lose my job, I have X months of savings available to me to cover this housing expense. Really get curious about that. Let's say you don't get laid off or lose your job, but you lose hours. Write out, if my job went down to 50% to 80% of the hours that I'm currently getting, could I afford the house that I want to live in? Could I afford the mortgage of the house that I want to live in? Really go through those different things, and that can help you decide if maybe you need to bulk up your emergency fund or your savings fund to give yourself some more breathing room. The other thing that you mentioned here is that you want to Airbnb your place while you're gone to generate additional income or additional revenue. I want you to ask yourself how important the money piece is versus how important the hosting and decor and writing up a listing and taking pictures piece is. There is no right or wrong here, but I want to get really clear about why Airbnb your place feels important to you. It's one thing to Airbnb a place that you don't live in. It's another thing to Airbnb a place you do live in. And we can replace Airbnb with short-term rental so that way it doesn't feel like we're biased towards that company. How comfortable are you having somebody else in your house when you're not there? Do you feel like you would want multiple sets of things in order to feel safe or comfortable in the house when you return? For example, multiple sets of sheets and towels and blankets and things like that. Does that feel like an important thing for you? Do you like the idea of being a host and writing out a little itinerary of things to do in the neighborhood and little surprises and delights, and does that excite you? Can you survive financially if your place isn't rented out? And if so, how long can you survive financially? Get clear on why you want to do short-term rentals outside of the financial piece of it. My concern for you is if you're going into purchasing a home with the idea that you're going to be renting it out to supplement the home, how can we make sure that you can afford it in the event that you don't rent it out? If you want more tips on how to practice self-trust, I have an entire video on financial self-trust that I think would be helpful for you. If after answering those questions, you feel really comfortable and really confident with the decision to purchase a home, we can go ahead and get into the numbers of it. All right, so I did a bit of research here to figure out what the average cost of housing is in Atlanta, what the average cost of renting is in Atlanta, how much the average flight attendant earns in Atlanta, to kind of create a little bit of solid guesstimations around what you might be spending now versus what you might be spending in the future. So the average cost of a house in Atlanta is just shy of $400,000 at $390,000. You also said that rent is about half of the cost of what the average mortgage would be. The average mortgage of a $390,000 house is about $1,900, which means you're probably paying around $950 in rent right now. If we just look at the math of this, paying $950 a month versus paying $1,900 a month, all right, so there are rent versus buy calculators all over the place. I'm not associated with or endorsing NerdWallets, but I just wanted to show you for the purpose of today. So I put in the numbers that I shared with you earlier. You want to live in Atlanta, Georgia. The average cost of a house is $390,000, assuming you're putting down 20% so that you don't have to pay private mortgage insurance. Average cost of interest right now is 6.25%, being there for 30 years, compared to spending about $950 a month on rent right now. Based on numbers alone, buying will never be cheaper than renting. But I also heard in your letter that you have a roommate. So let's say in the event of you just want to have your own place and you're curious about, can I afford to rent on my own versus can I afford to buy on my home? Let's change the $950 a month to assume you taking on the entire cost of rent. So this would then become $1,900. So now we have a more even playing field of you paying $1,900 in rent versus paying about $1,900 in a mortgage. You can see here that there is a break-even year right around year 5. If you plan to stay in the house for at least 5 years, then financially it makes sense to buy instead of rent. But if you plan on only staying in that house for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, you'll see that it actually doesn't make a lot of sense. So we also want to think about your time horizon, aka how much time you want to spend in that house. All right, some other numbers that I want to pull for you to encourage you and invite you to think about when you're considering buying versus renting. A general rule of thumb for your household expenses is 28%. What that means is that regardless of whether you're purchasing a home and paying a mortgage or you're renting a place and paying rent, your monthly housing expenses should be around 28% of your monthly take home. The average flight attendant salary in Atlanta is between $65,000 and $90,000 per year. So if your mortgage is going to be around $1,900, you need to be taking home about $6,700 per month. Looking at your flight attendant salary, if you're on the higher end of that flight attendant salary, that could absolutely be within your safe zone of bringing in $6,700 a month. The next thing I want you to think about is renting out a house. I played with Airbnb to see what the average income might be in Atlanta, and what their calculator showed was if you rent out your place for 30 nights on their platform, you can expect to make about $4,800. They take a 28% cut between their listing fees, taxes, stuff like that. So your take home would be about $3,400. So consider whether renting out your place for 1 month a year is worth earning $3,400. And when I say worth it, I mean physically, is it worth it to have somebody else in your home for that much? But also with that $3,400, can you offset the cost of getting your place rental ready and having duplicate sheets and blankets and towels and amenities and things like that, and paying for the wear and tear of having somebody else in your house? If that feels good to you, then you're in good shape. So we've gotten to this point of figuring out rent versus buy by looking at the numbers, by looking at your emotions. The other thing I wanted to address is that you said you have an emergency fund that will protect you as a renter, but you don't have an emergency fund that will protect you as an owner. To get you prepared to move from renting to owning, if that still feels good to you, I invite you to do something called playing house. Right now, if you're paying between $900 and $950 a month in rent, I want you to play house and imagine that you are paying $1,900 toward a mortgage every month. That means giving yourself permission to save $1,000 a month in an emergency fund, in a down payment fund, in a new house, new apartment fund. And that way you get used to what life feels like when you have a mortgage of $1,900 instead of what life feels like as a renter spending around $900 to $950 a month. This does two things. It gives you the psychological feeling of what it's like to have about $1,000 less to work with every single month. And it also has the added advantage of bulking up your savings account or bulking up your emergency fund, giving you some of that additional safety net, whether you decide to rent on your own and get rid of your roommate, or whether you decide to purchase a home or purchase a condo and move into that space. What I'll say to you is whatever you do needs to feel good to you, and you also need to make sure that you have your financial boxes checked so that you're feeling good as you move into this new space. Thanks so much for writing in. And if you have a question for me, go to mindmoneybalance.com/ask to ask me your question, and I might answer it right here. See you next time.